Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Woodside. My name is Tom.
Hi, Tom. We're glad you're here.
Thank you, Alan. So nice of you. Wow, I don't know. I was all ready for today, and now, I was just telling Adam, in the last 15 minutes, I've become nervous and uptight about something. I don't know. Is there something wrong that I don't know about? Okay. Because I'm actually fine. I'm just like, I feel like I've forgotten something or whatever. It's August 18th, and my name is in the bulletin, so I'm supposed to be preaching. Okay. We're all set. Well, welcome to Woodside. We have a mini grocery store in the back, by the back door. Is that from you?
Yeah. You're supposed to take it.
Please take the vegetables, huh? They look so yummy. It's like a salad ready to go. Thank you for sharing, Jay and Leslie. Today, as I understand it, Pastor Deb is on a bit of a vacation. She well deserves. I think she's on the beach. She said her and Hannah take a beach vacation every year. That's a good idea. Like, wow.
But in the South,
In the South. In the South, I'm shocked. Yeah, right. Why not Michigan? Anyway, okay, so welcome to Woodside, and today is, we're still in the season of Pentecost. We're thinking about post-Easter. We're thinking about post-resurrection. And the scriptures today are from Isaiah and Luke that we're going to be reading. There's 3 other scriptures, but we're going to hear from Isaiah and Luke. And they are, the Luke passage especially we'll be talking about is one of those passages that as we read it and as we listen to it this morning really causes us to scratch our heads because it's Jesus talking. And it's Jesus talking in a way that he doesn't normally talk, in a way that we don't envision Jesus. He's talking, maybe we would think, in a negative way. So the scriptures this morning, as they do every Sunday morning, challenge us to think about God, about Jesus in a new way, which is a good thing. So let's prepare ourselves for that. And as we say every Sunday morning, welcome to Woodside. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome at Woodside Church. Let's stand for our call to worship, please. Christ is in our midst. When God shows up, surprising things can happen.
We lay down our burdens and set aside our distractions.
Here we receive good news. Nothing is too wonderful for God.
So let us laugh and sing, rest and listen, dance and praise. Let us worship God.
Let us pray. Gracious God, we greet you once again in this sacred space. We have come because we need to be reminded of your love and your expectations for our living. We are like the vine you planted, watered, and protected. We know in our hearts that we need, want, and desire your presence in our lives. So we come in prayer to listen for your word to speak to our hearts and reveal again your desires for us. Amen. Remain standing. We'll sing together. Be thou.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my
A reading from Isaiah. Let me now sing a song of my friend. It is a love song about a vineyard. My friend had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. My friend dug the soil, cleared the stones, and planted the choicest vines. Then, within it, built a watchtower and constructed a winepress. My friend anticipated the crop of grapes, but what it yielded was rotten grapes. Now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more could I have done for my vineyard that I haven't done? Why, when I looked for the crop of grapes, did it bring forth bad fruit? Now I will let you know what I mean to do to my vineyard. Take away its hedge, give it over to grazing, break through its wall, let it be trampled. I will let it go to wilderness. It will not be pruned or hoed, but overgrown with thorns and briars. I will command the clouds not to send rain upon it. The vineyard of the God omnipotent is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are God's cherished vine. God looked for justice, but found bloodshed, for righteousness, but found out a cry of suffering. This ends the reading.
A reading from Luke. I've come to light a fire on earth. How I wish the blaze were ignited already. There is a baptism I must still receive, and how great my distress until it is accomplished. Do you think I'm here to bring peace on earth? I tell you, the opposite is true. I've come to bring division. From now on, a household of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2, 2 against 3, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Jesus said again to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say that rain is coming, and so it does. When the wind blows from the south, you say it's going to be hot, and so it is. You hypocrites! If you can interpret the portents of earth and sky, why can't you interpret the present time? This ends the reading.
It came to me while I was playing the piano why I'm nervous this morning. I had a recall while I was back there in the kitchen, but I had a raccoon in my house this week. Yeah. Anybody have that pleasure? Yeah. I'm not into animals. So I was thinking about that, about having to go home and checking the trap, and he's sequestered somewhere in the basement right now with doors propped shut and the trap is set. And so I was stressed because I was thinking about that I have to go home after that. So.
Where can have those vegetables over there?
What?
And put some of those vegetables in his
Well, I heard they like bread and marshmallows, so that's what's in his trap now. So let's see, or her trap. I don't know if it's a girl or boy. I don't care. He's going out. So that's good. You know, I love coming to church on Sunday, coming to Woodside, because this is a good, safe space for me, for all of us. And so I felt at peace until that moment I was in the kitchen and I had that raccoon thought. Thank you. So it's good to be here. I want us to think through and talk through just the scriptures that were just read to us this morning. Beginning with Isaiah. There's a classic jazz tune that probably most of us know, My Funny Valentine. Billy Smith sings in this ironic love song describing her lover's imperfections. And she says, and these are the words, your looks are laughable, unphotographable. Yet, you are my favorite work of art. And so, despite all of these imperfections, and perhaps even because of them, Billy encourages Val, but don't you change one hair for me, not if you care for me. Stay, little Valentine. Each day is Valentine's Day. Music is one of the most poignant ways in which to express love, and this was also the case in ancient Israel and Judah. Isaiah 5, 1-7 plays on this type of love song, once again using this marriage motif to describe the relationship between God and God's people. Yet the irony here cuts more to the quick than it does in My Funny Valentine. In this passage of Isaiah, the prophet recomposes the song, love song, into a lament over the nation's betrayal of God's principles. And so the prophet uses the metaphor of constant care for the vine dresser, for the vineyard, as the primary theme about the passage. And so first the prophet recounts the vine dresser's tender care and hard work in the vineyard. And the song describes the cultivation of the land, planting of the best stock of vines, and the construction of a protective watchtower and a perfect wine press. And despite even the divine vine presser's best efforts, the vineyard yielded what Scripture calls wild grapes. And that term suggests that not only are the grapes unusable, but that they emit a rancid odor, kind of like when you forget to cover the onions and you open the refrigerator, or a dish that's been in the fridge a little too long. That kind of poignant odor. God asks the people of Judah to judge for themselves what they think should be done with the stench of such an offensive and unproductive vineyard. And here we glimpse God's inward frustration. It's an emotional frustration at the detestable fruits of God's labor, of divine labor. What more was there to do for my vineyard? I have not done in it. When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? In response to this emotional frustration, God continues to use the farming and the cultivating land imagery to describe the devastation that God will wreak on this despicable vineyard. Instead of building a watchtower for the vineyard, God will remove its protective hedge and allowing it to be ravaged by the wild. Instead of planting choice vines, God will allow briars and thorns to overtake the vineyard. And God will neither till the soil nor prune the vines. God will hold back. He'll hold back even the rain from the vineyard so that it will languish in drought. In verse 7, the prophet translates the metaphor, the vineyard is the house of Israel, and its vines are the people of Judah. It gets a little more personal now. The prophet punctuates the whole metaphor with two puns in Hebrew. And the first is the wine that God desires with justice. Hebrew word is mishpat. But instead the people produced bloodshed. The Hebrew word is mishpach. The latter term used many interpretive problems and may be related to the Arabic term for which means to spill or to spill blood. So, damn the prophets and their metaphors. The metaphors have great scope, but can drive a point home with missile precision. The second, God also anticipates righteousness and has instead heard only a cry. And the latter term in this pun recalls the outcry against the violence of Sodom, as well as the cry of the people in the light of the abuse of their taskmasters in Exodus. Unlike My Funny Valentine in this passage, God describes all of the attributes that God granted to the people of Judah that should have yielded the perfect wine of justice and righteousness in their society. Despite all of their divinely granted privileges, the people snubbed justice for bloodshed and righteousness, for the wailing of the oppressed, And the bitter irony in God's mournful lament results in the divine rejection and punishment of God's people. And within the context of Isaiah, one can only discern the types of injustices that Judah perpetrated. They do not defend the cause of the widow and orphan. They coveted and stored up wealth for themselves. They oppressed the poor, and they acquitted the guilty and deprived the innocent of their rights. Many who choose to, when we preach about this, we are all recalling similar situations in our own head, in maybe our own lives or the lives of the world and the people around us. The ideals of justice and the ideals of justice and injustice in our society are ever apparent in the media. High-profile court cases and media coverage of war abroad and poverty with indeed amplified a crisis of injustice in our society. In congregations of privilege, the passage becomes a challenge. Are we using our privilege to produce a sweet wine of justice in our society? Or does our propensity to cower behind privilege result in the stench of injustice that will ultimately repulse the God who we claim to worship? Do we set out on quest for righteousness in our society? Or are our actions representing the church creating more harm than good? Some, however, might find themselves preaching to a group of disfranchisement, a congregation that is disenfranchised. God's words of condemnation towards the comfortable actually might be words of hope in the ears of the oppressed, just as God heard the outcry of the oppressed in Egypt. God hears the cry of the oppressed and is indignant. God intends to use God's people to promote justice and equality. We can echo God's love and care for the church by carefully cultivating justice in our own society. It was April 15th, 2013, when 2 bombs went off at the Boston Marathon. Remember where you were? I was at work, and we were, the place that I work at was filled with people who like to run. I'm not a runner. They happened to be looking at the Boston Marathon in the lunchroom and catching up on the race, and saw the bombs explode. Reflecting on this passage during that same week, which happens to be in the lectionary for that particular week, the initial debate that circulated in the media was whether to use the language of terrorism for this needless act. Concern for public reaction was part of the dilemma. What was circulating, whatever terms are used for this threat, was a general sense of fear. Not fear as in fear for one's life, but a sense of fear that this is the new context in which now the U.S. is going to have to live. It was a fear of the unknown, and that could wreak havoc at any moment, at any place, during any major event. One of the most troubling statements in the passage appears in chapter 12, in the Luke passage, Luke chapter 12, 51. Did Jesus come to bring peace? Was Jesus not the savior of Zechariah's prophecy, the messianic figure who would guide our feet into the way of peace? We hear that and we just kind of take a collective sigh of relief, and we're like, yeah, that's Jesus, peace. In Matthew, the parallel verses of this same exact story fall into the context of Jesus' mission, teaching to his disciples in Matthew chapter 10. In that context, the use of the term sword and the language of enemies make Jesus, Matthew's Jesus, appear much more militaristic. But Luke's Jesus is less so. Don't know why. Maybe because Luke is the only Gentile writer and had a different angle on things. As this passage suggests, the opposite of peace in Jesus' teaching is not war. The opposite of peace for Jesus in this passage is division. And this division is of a skeptic kind of division. Jesus' coming has created much conflict within families, synagogues, in the larger public arena. And certainly by the author's time, a couple of generations after Jesus' death, he has experienced or heard about the breakup of close-knit networks. Even these divisions, however, are ominous sounding, since divided houses usually do not survive. Here we get a glimpse of an apocalyptic Jesus, rarely discussed in the Gospels. Does Jesus really desire to scorch the earth? That's what he says. Probably not. This seems to be one of Jesus' many uses of hyperbole, common in his teaching. But why is Jesus so dramatic? He rarely gets stressed. His awareness of his upcoming death, referring to baptism, seeming to get to him. Why is he stressed? Stress gives the image and the idea of holding on tightly to something or squeezing. When our muscles are stressed, they're clenching on to themselves or to something else. In Luke's gospel, it's associated with sickness, like holding on to something, but holding on to a fever. A stressful situation, like holding on to fear. Sometimes Luke uses the term to describe crowds or enemies that are pressing in on others. And only Luke uses this term to describe how Jesus is feeling. In one translation, it says, "What stress I am under." And Jesus recognizes how this stress is causing a shift in his own mission. From now on, he says in verse 52, so Jesus turns to the violent images of masters in his parables to Peter and the other disciples, and forewarnings about the need to avoid judges. This may not be an outright critique of the whole legal system in this day, but Jesus appears to have little regard for judges with his futuristic outlook. He himself does not wish to play the role between quarreling brothers over inheritance rights, nor does he hesitate to tell parables in which unjust judges act. Jesus' advice is to settle out of court. To settle out of court. The whole same idea shared by Paul. Although the apostle does not credit Jesus with his own advice, but in 1 Corinthians 6, Jesus' point for followers in chapter 12 appears to settle their accounts on their own. The ancients were apparently better at predicting weather patterns than we are, but they are similar to us in their inability to predict the future of God's activity. That's tough. But Jesus has higher expectations for them, and he has even higher expectations for his disciples who have been entrusted with much, the stress of life. One experience that I had in learning about stress was listening to the story of a friend. My friend grew up in a part of what used to be called Bosnia-Herzegovina. I'm a believer in befriending and hanging around people who are different than me, including those who speak different languages. And one day I was in a coffee shop, and I heard him speaking, and I heard an accent that I wasn't familiar with, and he was talking to another friend of mine, so I scooched my chair closer. I'm tricky like that. And and eventually got introduced, and the other friend of mine left, and we were able to talk. I listened more to him than he listened to me, and I got to know him better. He proceeded to tell me how he has always struggled with making friends and talking with people. And I asked him why, and he told me that he grew up in the early 1990s in the area of Bosnia-Herzegovina region of Central Europe. And as you remember, that was a war-torn region at the time, more so than it is now. My friend recalls attending school for the first time, not attending school for the first time until he was in the 5th grade. I was shocked, and he said it was too dangerous to go to school. All the parents kept their kids at home. The fathers and older brothers would go out and fight as militia and try to make a living and bring some money into the home at the same time as fighting. Going to the grocery store or the pharmacy was a life-threatening, stressful event. In those early years of his life, he remembers seeing people killed, hearing of death, and destruction, seeing destruction all around him. Watching people running for their life just across the street to tend to a family member in another house. And this went on for the first 10 years of his life. Finally, he and his family were able to escape, and they traveled to different places, but ended up, of all places, Flint, Michigan. He attended U of M Flint for a while, and I met him just after he had stopped attending classes. And I was encouraging him, pushing him to finish his degree in psychology, but he just kept shaking his head. It's too difficult. And I asked him if it was because of the language, and it said, it seems like you have English mastered pretty well. But he had so many learning disorders and deficiencies in his learning, in how to study and how to process the learning, because he had spent most of his childhood in trauma and stress. And he was, however, a very successful business person here in Michigan. And he's made tons of money selling shoes online, has a keen sense of business, knows how to turn a profit, and now works at the U.S. Postal Office here in Flint. Very successful. As I listened to his story, I was shocked and I was fascinated and I was in awe. He experienced so many things that I haven't even come close to have experienced. We all have our own childhood trauma and experiences to deal with. I suppose all of us do. But this was extreme. It's a picture of stress and distress. What is the stress doing to us all? What is the real stress can make us all a bit more apocalyptic, looking at the fearful ending future, seeing all kinds of strange scenarios, especially for those who apparently are causing our stress levels to increase. Do we ever think about the negative consequences of our words and actions, the negative consequences of stress in our life? Do all benefit? Is there a privileging of us over them in the decisions at local board meetings, in city council, in zoning board meetings, in closed session meetings around the city, around the state, around the countries of the world? Perhaps Jesus was right. It may be preferable to settle with the accuser before you get to the county courthouse. It is counterculture for us to follow that kind of advice, but perhaps that's the point. Later, in a different context, Paul will give similar advice to the Corinthian Christians, even suggesting that it would be preferable to accept the wrong and swallow the loss. The Jesus of this passage is a bit unsettling, and we would do well to let him be so. It is easier, of course, to present the meek and lowly Jesus, who we all love. Jesus as the one who desires personal friendship with 21st century individuals. But that Jesus is not the one of Luke chapter 12. The gospel also present a Jesus who occasionally struggles with his own mission, who expects his followers to understand the season they are in, and who leaves us with as many questions as answers. In a similar vein, there are many events in our own contemporary setting that leave us few answers. Amen.
Please join me in our statement of faith. We are not alone. We live in God's world. We believe in God, who has created and is creating.
Who has come in Jesus, the Word made flesh, to reconcile and make new, who works in us and helps us by His Spirit.
We trust in God. We are called to be the church, to celebrate God's presence, to live with respect in creation, to love and serve others.
To seek justice and resist evil, to proclaim Jesus crucified and risen, our measure and our hope.
In life, in death, in life beyond death, God is with us.
We are not alone. Thanks be to God.
Let us offer our prayers to God, saying, O God, giver of love, receive our prayer. O God, we praise the strength of your love. Where there is hunger, raise up your love. Where there is hurt and persecution, empower your love.
O God, giver of love, receive our prayer.
Where nations are angry and plot harm against one another, bring your love. Where a government does not seek the welfare of all of its people, bring your love. Where power destroys what you have made, bring your love.
O God, giver of love, receive our prayer.
Where our fears keep us from offering aid to all the needy peoples, bring your love. Where there is division and jealousy, bring your love.
O God, giver of love, receive our prayer.
O God, increase our affection, increase our compassion, increase our joy. Heal those who are sick, those who are known only to you, and those we now name.
Brian Rose.
Greg Kelly.
Pam Beckley and Liz Perry. Mark Toad.
Bill and Gloria, Dorothy, Lindy, Michelle and Andrew, Karen, Catherine, Evelyn, Linda, Kathy, Mark, Betty, Tyler and Lita, Doug, Earl, Cliff, Jason, Jean, Laura, Sandra, Dot, Alex, Jenny, Don and Liz, Carrie, Greg, John, Melissa, John, Ashley, Brian, John, Jamie, Gabriel, Myron, Felicia, the family of Sharon, and the family of David.
O God. Where there is pain, bring your love.
O God, giver of love, receive our prayer.
O God, we thank you for the power of divine love and for the presence of your love in one another. Make us holy, make us whole, and through us bring healing to your world.
We ask in your most precious name. Amen.
People of God, we have come to that part of our worship where we are invited to respond with thanksgiving to God's provisions for us. We have an opportunity to participate with God in the care of God's people. Let our love of God lead us to generosity for the sake of those who need our help.
Let's stand and sing together. What have we to offer? What have we to share? Coins from the coffer, hearts filled with care. God will not falter, so let us dare. Lay it at the altar there. What have we to offer? What have we to bring? Love ripe with laughter, hope that we can sing. Dreams of what we're after, promises of when. Lay it at the altar then. What have we to offer? What have we to give? Eyes that are wide open, lies that we won't live. Truth that must be spoken, justice somehow. Lay it at the altar now. What have we to offer? What have we to give?
Bless, O God, these our gifts, and bless our desire to participate with you in the building of your realm among us. Accept these gifts as a sign of our love for you and for our neighbors. Amen.
God be with you.
And also with you.
Let us offer our prayers of thanksgiving for this meal. God, you moved over the waters and created order from chaos. You dreamed of community and made a world sufficient for all. You rescued your people from slavery and walked with them through the desert, accompanying them as a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. You gave them dreams and visions of a new way of living, a way of sharing the bounty of the earth with all its people, all your people. In Jesus, you tried one more time to show us a way that is better than what we can imagine. And when we threatened the status quo, we killed him to assert our own power. But your power is greater. and you choose not to have his death be the end of the story. So we share this meal, a meal Jesus told his followers to eat, a meal he said was his way of being with us in the struggle, in the quest for a mended world. And as he broke the bread, and as he poured the wine, he shared it with all and said to do this. And we do. To remember. But more than that, to live just for a moment in the communion of all that is possible. With this bread and cup today, make us again your holy people. Remind us that what has come before is nothing to be compared to what can be. That who we are is a delight to you, and our gift, our value in your work. Bless this bread and wine, and through it bless us, your people. Let us bear your light to the world and be part of your vision of peace.
In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
The table is ready. Let us pray. Bread, wine, community. These are your gifts to us, O God. Bless us through these, and through us, bless others.
We give you thanks always. Amen.
In this confused and fragile world, strengthen our faith and increase our love, and let your peace flow through us, that we might be an ocean of calm in what has become a restless sea.